What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. And this one is some of my final thoughts ahead of the Game Week 15 deadline. And because it was a quick turnaround between Game Weeks 14 and 15, I am recording most of this video on Thursday and won't be able to record it after Friday's press conferences. Usually I would, but to get it out on time, I'm going to have to record most of it before I've heard from the managers. So it's not ideal. Most of the time I would prefer to do it after the press conferences, but it does mean that I can get through a bunch of your questions. So with that in mind, make sure to give it a like if you enjoy the video. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Let's get into it. So let's start with a question that I had from multiple other people as well. Having had him since the start, it's finally time to replace Mbeumo. Who are the best replacements? Now I'm going to focus on players at Mbeumo's price or below. I don't think you need me to tell you that if you've got the money to go Salah, Saka, Palmer and you don't already own one of those three, that's probably where you should focus your transfer on. But for most people, they're looking at Mbeumo's price or below. Now, I had a bit of a think before I started recording to answer this question, and I'm not sure there's a standout. And in some ways, that's nice because you can go for a gut feeling if you've got one. Although some people prefer there to be a standout because that just makes your life easier, right? If there's an obvious player to go for, you don't have to give it much thought. I would probably be looking at Bowen, Mitoma, Gordon, and Semenyo. Now, with Semenyo, I think he's a decent pick. I'm not sure he's better than any of the other three players I've talked about, I've just mentioned. But I think if you want someone cheap to enable, I don't know, going for a premium defender or to enable a move for a premium midfielder or something like that, I think below 6 million, Semenyo is clearly the best choice. So that is who I would go for. But in isolation, I don't think he's better than any of Gordon, Mitoma, Bowen. Then between those three, it's quite tricky, right? If I look at the stats so far this season for Bowen, they're not that great. 0.14 non-penalty expected goals per 90, 0.27 expected assists. But we know he's capable of doing better than that. And it might be that by the Game Week 15 deadline or by the Game Week 16 deadline, Lopetegui's gone and another manager comes in instead. And that could improve fortunes at West Ham. And if you look at the fixtures that they've got coming up, they're not too bad. Next four, I would say. They've got Wolves at home this week, then Bournemouth away, then Brighton at home, then Southampton away. So the toughest game is probably that Bournemouth one. But the two home games aren't bad. And playing Southampton is absolutely fine. And with Bowen, you know that he's going to start every game and pretty much play 90. After those four games, it is Liverpool and City. So I guess Bowen is quite a short-term move. But I don't think the other two are necessarily massively great long-term options either. So that's in Mbeumo. With Mitoma, the numbers that he is putting up so far this season, by the way, if you want to check all these stats and use all the other tools over on Fantasy Football Hub, 30% off, 30-day free trial at the moment. Links in the description below. Mitoma's putting up 0.3 non-penalty expected goals per 90, 0.17 expected assists in a pretty decent Brighton team. They've been very good this season. They have had some matches where they probably should have won and haven't, but overall they're a decent side. And I quite like the fixtures that are coming up. Now, I will say I'm recording this before Thursday's games. So I haven't seen the Brighton game. I don't know if Mitoma's started, but he has started 12 of 13 game weeks so far. So the starts and minutes are pretty good. He often plays to 90. Brighton have a lot of attackers, but a lot of them are kind of central or play off the right. There are some, of course, that could play off the left if needed. But I think if Mitoma is fit, he's more often than not going to start. So you got Leicester away in 15. They haven't played Fulham yet. Leicester away in 15, then Palace at home, West Ham away, Brentford at home, Villa away. Arsenal at home, not great in 20. Then it's Ipswich away, Man United away, Everton at home, Forest away. And then even after that Forest game, you've got Chelsea at home, then Southampton away. Then Bournemouth at home, Fulham at home. So forget what I just said about none of them being long-term options. Brighton have a pretty nice run where there's not really a bad set of fixtures for like 3 or 4 game weeks in a row for a long time. But even when they play Arsenal, you could say that Aston Villa way is not great, but that's just 2 games. Then you get Ipswich. So I quite like Mitoma. Plus he's 6.5, and Bowen I think is still 7.4. Yeah, I think when I consider Mbeumo replacements, Bowen's usually the first one that springs to mind because he's been so good to us in the past. But for 0.9 million less, that money might enable you to do something more interesting later on. So I quite like Mitoma with the fixtures. And then you've got, who's the other one? Gordon. I think Gordon might be the most short term of the lot. We'll look at the fixtures in a minute. So Anthony Gordon, 0.27 non-penalty expected goals per 90, 0.18 expected assists. It's fair to say that none of these three players are really setting the world alight in terms of underlying numbers, but they are all pretty consistent when it comes to minutes, which is quite nice. And then the good thing about Gordon is right in front of you, you've got Brentford away, who are not great defensively. Then you've got Leicester at home, Ipswich away. And then even Villa at home in 18 is not bad. You do then have back-to-back away games against United and Spurs. But then from 21 to 24, it's Wolves at home, Bournemouth at home, Southampton away, Fulham at home. So Gordon and Bowen have kind of got four nice fixtures. You know, as a 4-game week run, they're both pretty good. And then they've got two tougher ones. Mitoma is probably better longer term, fixture-wise. And he's cheaper. There's a few other things to say though, right? Bowen, in terms of penalties, has probably got more of a chance of taking them than Mitoma. Paquetá is usually first choice, but he's not always on the pitch. Likewise with Gordon, Isak would take them as first choice, then Gordon if Wilson's not on the pitch. But Wilson can't seem to be... Sorry, not that he can't get fit, but he's not fit at the moment. And if Isak does miss out any game, Gordon would be next in line and play number 9. But obviously, as things stand, he's not going to take those penalties. So I'm trying to talk this through so I can give you a definitive, this is who I would go for. But I'm honestly not sure. And I like that there's no standout, but it makes it more difficult to answer the question. Definitely Semenyo if you need to go cheap to fund another move. I'm tempted just to say Bowen, because we know how consistent he's been in the past. But Gordon was very good last year. Mitoma was great before he got that injury last year as well. I think Mitoma for the money is decent. 6.5 million is a nice price. He's got the fixtures where if he does well, people will continue to buy him because the fixtures stay good for a long time. And I think even if you're not considering it right now, I think there will be a move to get in more premium defenders later on. So even if you've already got like your premium midfielders set, you're happy with your forwards, you may still need money for something else. So is Gordon worth 0.7 over Mitoma? Is Bowen worth 0.9? They could be, but I'd be very tempted to go Mitoma. Just really quickly, I know I've answered this question for quite a while already. Just a couple of other midfielders in and around that price that I haven't kind of got on the graphic. Maddison, again, haven't seen the game tonight against Bournemouth. You're going to be watching this on Friday. I'm recording it on Thursday. But Maddison's not a guarantee to start, so I don't think you can go there. Brennan Johnson is one of those players that if I had him, I'd be tempted to keep because you get that Southampton away game in 16. But I don't think I'd buy him because you've got Chelsea and Liverpool at home in the next 3 game weeks. And there's always a difference between buying and selling a player. Madueke just recently got benched before the Southampton game. No one's going for Luis Diaz right now. I think that's about it. And I'm going to talk about even cheaper midfielders later on. So my instinct when I saw the question was to say Bowen. But I think Mitoma should be pretty tempting. So what do we do with Aït-Nouri? If he's a sell, who do we go to? I think if he's already in your squad, you're probably just holding on to him. I can't really see a reason to spend a transfer getting rid before he's got to play West Ham away, Ipswich at home, and Leicester away. I know it's a bit concerning because there's not been any clean sheets apart from Southampton at home all season, right? That's the only one they've had so far. But we know he has the attacking capabilities, even though the underlying stats recently haven't been great. Like, I wouldn't let a small sample size of like 3 to 4 games worry you that much. The next 3 fixtures are pretty good. Now, I'm not saying I would put a huge amount of my own money on Wolves getting a clean sheet in those games because the defence just isn't great. But I think when you've got that good of a fixture run, you can probably keep hold of him. And also, it's worth pointing out, there's not a huge amount of other 4.5 million defenders that are doing great anyway. Like Aina at Forest has been doing decently, you know, for most of the season, but now the fixtures are pretty bad, right? So the clean sheets are probably going to dry up a bit. So I wouldn't particularly worry about it. If you've got the luxury position of a couple of transfers saved up, nothing else to do, you've got the money to go to like an Arsenal defender or a Liverpool defender, then fair enough. But elsewhere, I'm not sure you're massively missing out. Like, there's no one that springs to mind, at least while I'm recording this, where I feel like, yeah, that 4.5 million defender is much better. I know Ashley Young, by the way, has been doing incredibly well this season. Like 1 goal, 3 assists, a few clean sheets as well. Actually 5 so far. But Everton's fixtures coming up are absolutely terrible. Liverpool at home, Arsenal away, Chelsea at home, City away. You would probably bet on 0 clean sheets over those games. Crystal Palace, again, they've got to play City, Brighton, Arsenal before their fixtures get good. Someone like Munoz could be decent, right? He's got good goal threat as well. You don't want to buy him before the next 3 fixtures. So I would just chill with Aït-Nouri. I think most people over December are not going to have the luxury of just using transfers on players with good fixtures. So you just hold him, right? You want to buy defenders that are going to get clean sheets and the attacking returns. That obviously hasn't happened. But I think it's just... I don't want to say it's unlucky because Wolves' defence is not great. So you shouldn't expect many clean sheets. But I also think if I went back in time to when most people bought him and it was different circumstances for my own squad, I would have bought him too, expecting a few more returns than you've had. So who's to say he won't get a goal, assist over the next 3, maybe even pick up a clean sheet as well, and suddenly it looks a lot better. So I would keep him. If you're selling, I would probably go to Arsenal or Liverpool. If you have to go to a different 4.5, then maybe look at someone like Van Heck at Brighton. But if you're just moving to him, I feel like it's more worthwhile long-term just to roll the transfer instead. So do we go for Trent or Timber first if money isn't an issue? Now, I did discuss both of these players in a bit more detail in the early thoughts video yesterday if you want to check that out. I'm just going to focus not on what they offer, but which one I would go for first, right? As is in the question. If you're going to end up buying both of them eventually, like one this week, one next, I think I would go for Trent first because I feel like on paper, Everton away is probably a little bit easier than Fulham away. Now, it is a derby for Liverpool, so maybe that adds a little bit of extra spice to the game. But I think on paper, if I had an attacker and I got to choose Everton away or Fulham away, I'd probably choose Everton, although defensively they have done okay recently. So maybe it's a little bit more even than that. But even if we say it's even, Trent is more attacking than Timber, so I think I would buy him first. I think the next 4 fixtures for Arsenal in general are pretty good. But the real good ones are probably Everton at home and Ipswich at home. So you don't have that game against Everton until game week 16. So I think I would buy Trent this week, then Timber. If you've got the money to buy both and you're going to buy one this week, but potentially you're worried that something else might happen and therefore you've got to concentrate transfers elsewhere, I think long-term Trent is the one to go for. The only slight issue there is that he's obviously not long back off a hamstring issue, whereas Timber seems to be pretty much fully fit. But I think long-term, if we're thinking about minutes, fixtures, attacking output and stuff like that, Trent is probably the one, so he's the one I get first. So is Salah captaincy really that obvious this week? Salah has an early kickoff away in a Merseyside derby without McAllister and against a half-decent Everton defence. Now, on the Merseyside derby thing, I looked up Salah's record on Transfer Market while playing Everton. He's played them 11 times in the Premier League and got 7 goals and 1 assist. So 8 returns in 11 games is pretty good. He was actually benched quite a lot under Klopp for this derby, but he did play a few times. Looking at the home and away split, it's quite close. Like back in 2020-21, 1 goal away from home, he blanked at home. Game week the season of 2021-22, 2 goals away from home, 1 assist at home. And then the last 2 seasons, it's just returns at home, none away. So there's not really anything to take away from that, apart from Salah's pretty good and he'll score against pretty much anyone. On the Everton decent defence thing, I agree, but it's a lot more difficult when you're playing a team like Liverpool, right? It's similar to how there's a lot of good teams in the Premier League, but Arsenal are almost always odds on to get a clean sheet versus everyone else because they're such a good defence. So Everton defence is decent, but playing against Salah is tough. If we look at some of their more difficult games, let's see what the XG is in more of their difficult games. So Spurs away back in game week 2, 2.43 expected goals conceded. I guess it's fair to say they were without Branthwaite for a lot of the opening part of the season. So maybe we can't put too much emphasis on that. But then at the same time, they've had decent numbers recently, but a lot of the fixtures have been good. So I'm not sure we can really put too much stock on that. I think we just have to accept that Salah is great. The early kickoff thing is interesting, though, because it is a midweek game week, right? Straight into an early kickoff. So maybe that plays a small part, but I'm not sure it's going to be enough to put me off captaining Salah. And also, I don't think anyone else who's a genuine captaincy contender really is a standout either, right? Maybe Watkins against Southampton, but the fact he just got subbed off before the 70th minute in the last game would maybe worry me a little bit. I think if you've got Watkins and you're confident he starts, that is a big differential. And he did take the last penalty, so maybe he's penalty taken for them now. But that's not. I just like captaining the premium, so not for me. No one's going to captain Fernandes against Forest. So if you look at the other main contenders, like Palmer against Spurs away. Now, to be fair, when you see that kind of game on paper, the first thought is it's not that easy. Spurs' defence is not that great, so maybe Palmer's okay. But is Palmer against Spurs away better than Salah against Everton away? I'm not convinced it is. And then you could argue that Saka's got one of the toughest fixtures out of all of them against Fulham away, because they've been pretty good this year. I don't know, if you've got Haaland maybe against Palace, I just think it probably is Salah. I don't think Salah is like by far and away the best option. Like if Salah was playing Southampton at home, that would just obviously be a super easy choice. It's not like Salah is so far ahead of the rest. If you wanted to go different, you could. But I don't think the early kickoff is probably going to put me off. Like the guy is just ridiculous so far this season. There's no signs of that letting up. Everton defence is good. But when you're up against Liverpool, it's a lot tougher. So obvious, maybe not. But I think he probably is where I'm going to go. If I wasn't going to go for him, I mean, for my team, I'd probably have to go Palmer. Like Palmer versus Saka is quite interesting. You can maybe put Saka ahead if you think Fulham is a bit easier. Again, I just don't think either of them are better than Salah, so that's probably where I would go. If you've got Haaland, I would be tempted to captain him, because I don't think he's massively behind the rest, and he's a huge differential. And if you've got it in you to back against the crowd again, because some of you probably did it against Forest, I'd be tempted to go there. But if you've got Salah, for me, he'd be the one. So having seen both Nicholas Jackson and Robert Sanchez rotated out of Chelsea's team last night, can we have any faith in the availability of Chelsea players going forward? So if you had Jackson, Sanchez, Colwill, etc., not ideal to miss such a good game. And I think there are concerns now moving forward for the next time we have fixtures in quick succession. But luckily, that's probably not going to be for a few game weeks. So I think it's something to have in the back of your mind, but not to panic about right now. I think if we look at the gap between games coming up, you've got Spurs away on Sunday. So all those players will come back in. Then Brentford at home is the following Sunday. Then Everton away the Sunday after that. So in between, they will have midweek games. But presumably, that's where the likes of Nkunku, João Felix, etc. will continue playing rather than getting minutes in the league. After that, game week 17 against Everton, you do then have Fulham at home 4 days later and Ipswich away 4 days after that. So I think Fulham at home and Ipswich away, one of those two games, there is probably now an increased risk of Chelsea players missing out. Does that mean you have to sell them before we get to that point? Not necessarily, because they are such good fixtures, and so are the ones afterwards, that Chelsea players are still going to be decent long term. But if you've got, I don't know, 2 or 3 of these players, that might be more of a worry, because the thing is, it's not just Chelsea players that will get rotated. And also, anyone that picks up an injury around kind of Christmas Boxing Day, they don't have to be out for many days to miss kind of like maybe 1 to 2 game weeks. And so you will have other issues to deal with. So it would probably put me off buying Chelsea players more now. Like, not only is Jackson 1 yellow card away from a suspension, but he also might miss a really great fixture in the next 3 to 4 game weeks. That would probably put me off buying him. And similar with Colwill, I might just look for another 4.5 million defender instead. Because as I've said many times, I can't be bothered to keep transferring out 4.5 million defenders. I don't want headaches like that. So it's something to be concerned about, aware of for sure. And if you get the transfers later on to maybe move them on to someone just as good that won't get rotated, I would do that. But I don't think there should be a huge panic about it. And the fact they didn't even have to come off the bench obviously worked out quite nicely. And if they do well in those future fixtures where they might be on the bench, then hopefully you don't get a cameo. But I think if you see value and points long term for these players, you can probably just keep hold of them. So what should us Ederson owners do? I think for the most part, unless Pep Guardiola comes out on Friday and pretty much tells you he's starting the next game, he probably has to go for most people, because at 5.5 million for your goalkeeper spot, you can't have this concern over starts every single week. It's just not an ideal situation to be in. The only way I would maybe keep him is if Fabianski is your backup goalkeeper, because this week Fabianski has got Wolves at home. You could just bench Ederson, play Fabianski, hope that he gets a clean sheet or some saves or whatever it might be, and just give Ederson another chance to get that number 1 spot back, or at least get back in the 11. Because the weird thing is, before the Forest game, Pep Guardiola said, Ederson is my number 1, Ortega is my number 2, but maybe Stefan will continue. So even though he thinks Ederson, or at least he's telling us that Ederson is the number 1, that's not what we're seeing in the lineup. So if you wanted to give it another week, Fabianski at least has Wolves at home. And then even after that, I mean, Bournemouth away, Brighton at home, Southampton away. I guess if you're stuck for transfers because you've got other stuff to deal with, you could just play Fabianski. If you're in a position where your backup goalkeeper isn't Fabianski and isn't going to play, I would sell him. Now, which goalkeeper to go to is tricky. Long term, I've just mentioned with Timber and Trent, you could argue that for clean sheets, Liverpool's fixtures are better. But unless Slot tells us that Alisson is back, you probably just can't go for him. And I wouldn't buy Kelleher right now because at some point Alisson is going to be back during December. So that's too much of a concern unless, again, Slot tells you he's in the 11. Otherwise, if you want to keep a similar amount of money in that spot, then you go for Raya, right? I know people will say he either gets 2 points or 6, and that has happened for most of the season. But we saw earlier on, right, 8-pointer against Wolves, 10-pointer against Villa, 9-pointer against Spurs. He's capable of doing more than just 2 and 6, and you'd be backing the best defence in the league, right? Arguably, anyway. So I like Raya for the same price. If you're coming down, no matter what the underlying numbers say, Man United always seem to get clean sheets. So at 5.2, you could look at Onana, but I just can't see me spending just 0.3 less than Raya. So that's where I would go. And if you're going cheap, and by the way, when I say that's where I would go, I mean I would go for the Arsenal keeper over Man United. If you're going cheap, maybe Verbruggen at 4.5. Like Brighton have some pretty nice fixtures for quite a while, as I discussed earlier with Mitoma. And at some point, you're going to use your second wild card as well. So if Verbruggen's not going well, you can fix it at that point. I don't know when is going to be a great time to use wildcard 2 yet. We'll have to wait for a bit more information. But it's not like you're stuck with Verbruggen for the long term. So he's probably the cheap goalkeeper I would go for. Crystal Palace have fairly decent fixtures from 18-19 onwards. But before that, you've got the City, Brighton, Arsenal games. I think unless you're massively confident that Crystal Palace are a much better defence than Brighton, which I don't think they are, I think it's better just to pick up the good fixtures from Verbruggen straight away. You can't even go for Sanchez now because he just got rotated against Southampton. For what it's worth, Sanchez is clearly number 1. He will come back into the team against Spurs. But as soon as fixture congestion happens again, like between game week 17, 18 and 19, he could get benched for one of those games and Jorgensen could play instead. So I don't think you can go for Sanchez now. So if it's a cheap goalkeeper, I'm probably going for Verbruggen. If it's the same price as Ederson, I'm probably going for Raya. Around that 5 million price point, I'm not sure there's really anyone that I would go for. Like Pickford's about to come into bad fixtures. Nottingham Forest fixtures get a little bit worse. So that kind of counts out Pickford and sells for me. Nick Pope at 5 million. Maybe Newcastle's fixtures aren't too bad. I'm just not... At this point, I'm not massively convinced that Newcastle will keep more clean sheets than Brighton, so I don't know if I would spend the extra 0.5. So for me, it's Raya or Verbruggen. So cheap midfielders next. Who would you choose to bring in out of Amad Diallo, Enzo Fernandez and Morgan Rogers? Now, unlike the Mbeumo question earlier, I do think there's a standout here, and for me, that would be Morgan Rogers. I think with Amad Diallo, he's 0.3 million cheaper, which is quite nice, and there is some potential upside there. If you look at his recent matches, he has done really nicely. 2 assists against Everton in game week 13, 1 assist against Ipswich, 1 assist against Leicester as well. We can forgive him for blanking against Arsenal, difficult fixture, and he only came on at half-time as well. But the fact he didn't start that game is what would put me off. You can't guarantee his minutes. I think he is first choice right wing-back right now for Amorim, and I think that probably will continue for a while, but that doesn't guarantee you a start every week. Whereas with Morgan Rogers, for 0.3 million more, you've got someone that has started every single game so far. 14 starts, 4 goals, 2 assists. So 6 attack and returns in 14 games is not bad at all. It's worth saying that if Unai Emery is going to rest Morgan Rogers, game week 15 against Southampton would be the time to do it after he's just played midweek. But I've got a feeling he's going to start again. I think it's more likely that he gets subbed early. So I would find it difficult to buy Amad over Rogers, but I do acknowledge there is potential upside with Amad Diallo in that role that he's playing. But you've also then got Man City away in game week 16, so it's not exactly a great fixture run over the next 2. With Enzo Fernandez, that would be an easy one to discount for me because he's missed games recently. And as far as I know, he wasn't injured. So he's played 90 minutes for 3 games in a row, which is nice. But before that, it was 22, 19, 18, 37 minutes. So 4 games where he didn't start. And like I said, as far as I know, he wasn't injured. The other thing with Enzo is he would block a Chelsea spot. Now, I've only got one Chelsea player in my team, which is Cole Palmer. But I'm massively interested in Jackson once he's served that suspension, once he's got that 5th yellow card, because the fixtures for Chelsea are good for a while. And up until maybe this week just gone, I was also looking at Colwill. Now, maybe because of what's happened with the rotation in that Southampton game, I'll never buy Colwill and I might never buy Sanchez. I may never need that 3rd Chelsea spot, but I also might do. And so I wouldn't want to necessarily block that. And I know that sounds stupid from someone that's blocked Saka by triple Arsenal defence, but I think it's worth considering. Like, if Enzo was so much better than like a Rodgers, I'd happily block that spot because I may never need triple Chelsea, but I don't think he is. So I think it's got to be Morgan Rodgers. Like, his price hasn't skyrocketed because, you know, he's not Cole Palmer of last year, but I still think he's the best option in and around that price. By the way, if you've got a little bit more money, you could also look at someone like Cliver at Bournemouth, 5.4 million on penalties. Again, not seen the Spurs match yet, but I don't know, the minutes just not great. The underlying numbers are not great either. I feel like you are quite a lot relying on those penalties. So I like the fixtures for Bournemouth, and I wouldn't completely rule Cliver out. But again, I think I would just rather go for Rodgers. It feels easier to say that now after he's just scored against Brentford. But I think he is just decent value, and I think he will continue to be in that first 11 for Villa. I don't know if you can say the same about any of the others. So given that so many prolific strikers have nice fixtures every other week, does it make sense to stick to the template of Saka, Palmer and Salah and just rotate strikers only? For example, game week 15, Watkins, so Southampton at home. Game week 16 and 17, Isak. I think he's got Ipswich and Leicester. Let me just double check. It's, Leicester at home 16, Ipswich away in 17. Game week 18, Havertz, which is also Ipswich at home. And then game week 19, Haaland, if people have got the money. So in theory, that sounds nice. In reality, these things never work because injuries and suspensions happen. I think if you've got that template midfield of Saka, Palmer and Salah, you're sticking with that for a very long time unless you really feel an urge to get Haaland, which we'll talk about in a minute, or if one of them gets injured. But I think that what that would make me want to do is just roll more transfers, basically. Like, I think that rotation in theory sounds nice, but Isak could get something against Brentford away to match Watkins against Southampton at home. So just get Isak and save yourself a transfer. Havertz in game week 18 could be really nice, but that means for the next 4 weeks, or the next 3 weeks, sorry, you don't have triple Arsenal. And I think it would be better just to get Saka in double defence than worry about one game in game week 18 for Havertz. So I think what the template what it would say to me is this is probably a good time to try and roll transfers where you can, because there aren't a huge amount of upcoming fixture swings. Like Palace have one in game week 19, Munoz, Eze, Mateta you might want to look at, but they're probably not going to be major game changers for your squad. City have one coming up from game week 18, but again, outside of Haaland, which defenders, midfielders are going to be nailed, you're probably not going to need a huge amount of them. So the fact you can roll up to 5 free transfers and you've got the luxury that your squad looks pretty good right now, I would use that luxury because stuff will happen, especially with the extra fixtures over Christmas. There will be rotation, there will be injuries, and you'll need those transfers. So, yeah, I wouldn't be rotating. Personally, I would just get Isak. I think he's probably better than Watkins next 3 or 4. I discussed that in yesterday's video. And just enjoy it for now because there will be chaos coming, right? We've still got a mystery chip to find out what that is and how that's going to be used. And who knows, having spare transfers saved up might be helpful. We might get blank and double game week info. There's just tons to come. So as you can tell, having a template's quite boring. I get that. But it's also nice just to stack transfers because chaos will ensue. So is it time to finally drop Haaland, or is there hope for him? Now, I think with a player like Haaland, there's always hope, right? He's not a bad player. The goals will come eventually. And I'm sure when they do, he'll go on a run where he probably scores like 8-9 goals in 6 or 7 game weeks. When exactly is that going to happen? Unfortunately, I can't predict that. Otherwise, I'll be well on my way to winning FPL this year. All I can do really is answer it from my own perspective of having not owned him since game week 10. I still don't have him. I've still got no plan to get him back. And at the moment, I'm not particularly worried about it. And I know at some point he's going to score that hat-trick, and that might get me to rethink. But the reason I'm not particularly worried is because I'm really happy with the rest of my squad. Now, I can easily, if I want to, for example, go Rico Lewis straight to Trent Alexander-Arnold and still have 0.4 million in the bank. I've got triple Arsenal defence and Trent and Salah and Palmer, and still got someone like Dominic Solanke up front. And even if he gets injured, there's lots of other forwards to go to. So I don't feel like I'm missing Haaland. And even with this setup, I've still got a route from Fernandes to Saka as well. So potentially I could have double Arsenal defence and Trent and Palmer and Salah and Saka. That sounds pretty good to me. Haaland would have to score a lot of goals for it to be worth it over the squad that I can build without him. And so that's why I'd still be pretty tempted to say, if you've got the transfers to spread that money around quickly, and I think that probably is the key, right? If you're selling him and you've only got one transfer, it's not ideal. Because to move him to a premium midfielder, you've got to use then a -4 hit. And even when you've done that, you've probably got money left over. You don't want to start taking -8. So if you've got the transfers to switch the funds quickly, because ultimately having that money elsewhere is ideally, doesn't always work like this, but ideally how you're going to get those extra points, I would do it. He's not an absolute must sell because Palace away, Man United at home, Villa away is not terrible. And from 18 onwards, the fixtures are good. But I think you can just build a better squad without him. If you're prepared to go through with it for the long term, then it's pretty decent. Or make sure you've got a good route back to him quickly in case you do get to the point where you want him back. But the problem with that is that means you probably can't spread the cash around too much. Like, it's a tricky dilemma. I'm telling you now, when it gets to game week 18, people will be thinking about him. And someone asked me, I can't remember if it was before game week 14 or before game week 15, like, do I have a plan to get Haaland? I don't. I am winging it at the moment. I'm happy to be honest about that. I've got no plan to get him back. In 18, I'm happy to captain Salah against Leicester at home. In 19, I'm happy to captain Palmer against Ipswich away. Even though Haaland's got great fixtures, there's other options there. Maybe in game week 20, if West Ham are still looking terrible, then I'll look to get him back. Possibly something will happen in my squad and I'll have a few saved transfers by game week 18, and maybe I'll just get him back earlier than planned. But at the moment, things are going so well. And even if Haaland starts banging braces and hat-tricks, I mean, Palmer and Salah and Saka can do the same thing, right? Salah's points so far have been absolutely ridiculous. It's 4 double digits hauls in a row. So even if Haaland's getting braces, I'll be captaining Salah anyway, and he's capable of probably not keeping up this amount of points for much longer, but he's still more than capable of ticking over with a decent amount of returns. So that's all I can really say. I feel like with Haaland, I'm basically just saying the same things every week, but not much is changing. He's still not returning a massive amount. He's still taking up a massive amount of your budget. I still prefer squads without him. There's plenty of other captaincy options. It does not have to be Haaland. And at this point, if it's just been like fear that stopped you from selling him, there's not a huge amount to fear other than the week you sell him might be the week that he gets those 2 or 3 goals. Because in terms of ownership from engaged managers, it's really low. Right? I think I saw people talking about his effective ownership was something like 7% against Forest. That is ridiculous for someone like Erling Haaland. You would never ever have guessed that at the start of the season. So there's not even an ownership fear. Like, even when he gets the next hat-trick, it probably won't affect your rank if you're a non-owner as much as it usually would. So that's all I can say. I would probably still drop him, but a bit like the conversation before the Forest game, the closer you get to Everton at home... sorry, I've got the wrong player there. The closer you get to Everton at home for City in 18, the less likely you'll want to do it. So if you keep him for Palace, you're only 2 game weeks away from this really good run between 18 and 22. And that's when Man City have Everton at home, Leicester away, West Ham at home, Brentford away, Ipswich away. But even then, I'm not convinced he's essential. And if you're now thinking to yourself, well, I'll keep him because De Bruyne's fit, I'm not convinced that De Bruyne will play all these games anyway. I just think there will be some kind of fitness concern with him. He'll get the odd benching here and there. So, yeah. I mean, I guess the time to drop him was a while away. We can't go back in time, as I always say. So, Yeah, I would probably drop him. That's all I can say. If you're still a Haaland owner, let me know in the comments below what you're going to do with him. If you've enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Check out Fantasy Football Hub using the links in the description below. 30% off at the moment and a 30-day free trial. I will be back later today with a team selection video that I will have recorded on Friday, but again, before the press conferences, and I'll talk through the moves that I'm thinking for my team and what it might look like for future weeks. So thanks for watching. Thanks for bearing with me as I recorded this a little bit earlier than normal. Hopefully from next week onwards, I'll be back to recording final thoughts after the press conferences, which is much more ideal. But for this one, I thought it was just good to get through a bunch of your questions. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you again soon.